The September sun was beginning to set over Baltimore when Gervonta Davis parked his black Mercedes on the corner of Monroe Street, right in front of the same corner store where he used to buy candy with the coins he found on the ground as a child. The familiar smell of hot asphalt mixed with the aroma of fried chicken from local restaurants brought a wave of memories he didn't expect to feel so intensely. Tank had returned to the city after a crushing victory in Las Vegas, but this time it wasn't for the usual celebrations or family visits. There was something different in the air, a restlessness that had been following him since he saw the news about budget cuts to public school sports programs in Baltimore. The same schools where he could have studied, if circumstances had been different. Walking through the familiar streets, he observed groups of young people on the corners, some not much different from what he was 15 years ago. There was raw energy in those boys, the same hunger he recognized in his own eyes when he looked in the mirror at 12 years old. They had talent that was visible, but they lacked opportunity. The boxer stopped in front of the Upton Boxing Center, where it all began for him. The building seemed smaller than in his memories, but the faded sign still hung over the entrance door. Calvin Ford still trained there, molding the next generation of fighters with the same dedication that had transformed Tank's life. It was impossible not to feel gratitude for that place that gave him purpose when the world seemed to have none to offer. That afternoon, while watching a training session through the fogged window, Tank made a decision that would change many people's lives. It wouldn't be something grandiose or posted on social media. It would be discreet, genuine, and directed exactly where it could make a real difference. He knew he had grown up on those streets and understood better than anyone what those young people needed to find their way. The idea began to form in his mind as he watched a skinny 13-year-old boy working the heavy bag with impressive technique, but with gloves so old they barely covered his hands. It was like seeing himself in the past, full of potential but limited by circumstances. Tank felt absolute clarity about his next step and knew it would have to be executed as discreetly as possible. In the following days, Tank began a meticulous investigation into the real situation of youth sports programs in Baltimore. He didn't want to appear as the savior hero, nor create a media circus around his help. Instead, wearing simple clothes and a cap pulled low over his eyes, he visited different gyms, schools, and community centers, observing and listening. What he discovered was more alarming than he had imagined. Marcus Thornton, director of the East Baltimore Community Center, explained the situation with brutal honesty during a casual conversation. Equipment had been broken for months, gym memberships were unaffordable for most families, and many talented young people were abandoning the sport due to lack of basic resources like gloves, mouthguards, and proper sneakers. Tank met Isabella Rodriguez, a volunteer trainer who worked with girls in women's boxing. She told him about Keisha, a 15-year-old girl with extraordinary reflexes who had stopped training because she needed to work after school to help her mother with bills. There was also Jerome, a 17-year-old boy who walked 5 miles every day to get to the gym because he didn't have money for public transportation. The story that impacted him most was that of Devon Wright, a 14-year-old boy whose father had been arrested and whose mother worked 3 jobs to support the family. Devon had impressive natural talent, but was training with borrowed and improvised equipment. His gloves were 3 sizes too big for his hands, and he was using a mouthguard he had found on the gym floor. While watching these young people train with determination that rivaled professional fighters, Tank felt something he hadn't experienced in years, a deep connection to his own journey. They were him, 15 years ago, fighting not just in the ring, but against all the adversities that life had placed in their path. That night, in his luxurious Miami apartment, Tank couldn't sleep. Images of the young Baltimore boxers occupied his mind, and he knew he had the resources to make a real difference in their lives. It wouldn't be pitying charity. It would be investment in the human potential he had recognized in each of those boys and girls. Tank decided to act strategically and discreetly. Instead of making a big announcement or organizing a media event, he chose to work directly with the trainers and directors of the centers he had visited. His plan was simple: provide everything those young people needed to train properly, but do it in a way that preserved their dignity and didn't create dependency. He contacted Roberto Silva, owner of a sporting goods store in Baltimore, and made a request that left the merchant speechless. Tank wanted to buy high-quality boxing equipment for approximately 100 young people, but with one specific condition. The purchase had to be anonymous, and the equipment should be delivered as if they were donations from an anonymous benefactor. The operation was planned down to the smallest details. Tank transferred a significant amount to a special account that would be managed by Samantha Brooks, a trusted lawyer specializing in discreet philanthropy. The money would be used not only for equipment, but also to cover gym memberships for underprivileged youth for an entire year, plus provide transportation for those who lived far from the training centers. The most touching aspect of the plan was personal. Tank had prepared a list with the name of each young person he met during his visits, along with their specific needs. Devon Wright would receive gloves in the exact size and a personalized mouthguard. Keisha would get not only equipment, but also a scholarship that would allow her to train without having to work after school. To maintain anonymity, Tank created a simple cover story. A former professional boxer who had grown up in Baltimore and now lived overseas had decided to give back to the community. The beneficiaries would never know it was Gervonta Davis behind it all. That was exactly how he wanted it. 2 days before the equipment delivery, Tank visited the training centers one more time. This time he observed the young people with a different perspective. He knew that soon their lives would change significantly, but they had no idea. There was something deeply satisfying about knowing he could impact their journeys without receiving any credit for it. On a rainy Monday morning in October, delivery trucks began arriving at different training centers in Baltimore. Marcus Thornton was the first to receive the mysterious phone call. An unfamiliar voice on the phone simply said there would be a special delivery for the young boxers at his center, courtesy of a friend of the sport. When the boxes were opened, the reaction was instant and emotional. There was top-of-the-line professional equipment, Everlast gloves in the exact measurements of each young person, personalized mouthguards, headgear, new heavy bags, and even training clothes with embroidered names. Each item had been carefully selected to meet the specific needs of each young person. Devon Wright was one of the first to receive his personalized kit. When Calvin Ford handed him the gloves that fit his hands perfectly, the boy was silent for long minutes. He had never owned anything so new and of such high quality. His hands trembled slightly as he put on the gloves, and for the first time in months he genuinely smiled. Keisha received not only equipment, but also the news that her gym membership was paid for the next 12 months. Isabella Rodriguez had to leave the room for a few minutes to compose herself before giving the news to the girl. When Keisha finally understood what was happening, she threw herself into the trainer's arms and cried with relief and gratitude. The transformation was immediate and visible. The young people who had previously trained with improvised equipment now moved with renewed confidence. It wasn't just about having new gloves or proper protectors. It was about feeling that someone believed in them enough to invest in their dreams. The atmosphere in the training centers changed completely. The most touching aspect was observing how the young people themselves began to care for each other differently. They knew they had received something special, and this created a sense of collective responsibility. The more experienced ones began to help beginners with more dedication, and everyone treated their new equipment like precious treasures. In the following weeks, something extraordinary began to happen at Baltimore's training centers. The frequency of young people at training increased dramatically. Boys and girls who had abandoned boxing due to lack of resources returned when they saw their friends with professional equipment and real training opportunities. Jerome, the boy who walked 5 miles to train, discovered there was a free transportation van that would take him and bring him back home every day. The driver, Thomas Anderson, was a volunteer paid anonymously to provide this service. Jerome didn't know that van had been specifically organized to ensure that young people like him wouldn't miss training due to transportation difficulties. The quality of training improved significantly. With proper equipment, trainers could implement more advanced techniques and exercises that were previously impossible due to material limitations. Calvin Ford noticed that the level of discipline and commitment among the young people had increased dramatically. They understood they were receiving a special opportunity and didn't want to waste it. Samantha Brooks, the lawyer who managed the anonymous fund, began receiving weekly reports on the progress of the benefited youth. The stories were inspiring. Devon Wright had lost 15 pounds and was participating in his first amateur competitions. Keisha had not only returned to regular training, but was also helping to train younger girls. What impressed most was the multiplying effect of the initiative. Other community members, inspired by the example of the anonymous benefactor, began contributing what they could. Small local merchants offered discounts on supplements and sportswear. Some parents volunteered to help with transportation and event organization. Tank, who continued to follow the progress discreetly, was moved to see how his action had created a wave of generosity and hope in the community. What began as an individual gesture had transformed into a collective movement of support for the region's youth. 3 months after the deliveries, Devon Wright was preparing for his first important amateur fight. The boy had trained tirelessly with his new equipment and showed impressive technical evolution. Calvin Ford knew Devon had the potential to go far in the sport, but this fight would be a crucial test to measure his true level. Tank decided to watch the fight, staying discreetly in the stands of the central Baltimore gymnasium. He wore a hood and dark glasses, blending in with the small crowd of family and friends who had come to support the young fighters. Seeing Devon enter the ring with professional equipment he had provided was a moment of deep personal satisfaction. The fight was intense and balanced. Devon showed refined technique and iron determination that impressed everyone present. Calvin Ford, watching from ringside, couldn't hide his pride seeing the evolution of the boy he had helped mold in recent months. In the third and final round, when it seemed the fight could go either way, Devon applied a precise uppercut that knocked down his opponent. The explosion of joy from the small crowd was contagious, and Tank had to restrain himself from standing up and shouting with emotion. After the victory, Devon was surrounded by his family and friends. His words during the post-fight interview deeply touched everyone present. He spoke about how he had almost given up boxing a few months ago, but that an anonymous guardian angel had given him a second chance. He said that victory wasn't just his, but belonged to everyone who believed in him when he didn't believe in himself. Keisha had also evolved significantly. She was training for her first women's competition and had become a natural leader among the younger girls. Isabella Rodriguez commented to other trainers that she had never seen such a dramatic transformation in a young female athlete. Keisha's confidence had grown not only in the ring but in all aspects of her life. That night, Tank returned home with a sense of accomplishment that none of his professional victories had given him. He had made a difference in those young people's lives without seeking recognition or personal glory. It was the purest feeling of satisfaction he had ever experienced. What Tank didn't expect was that his identity would be discovered in a completely unexpected way. During one of his discreet visits to the Upton Boxing Center, Marcus Webb, a 16-year-old who had been training for a short time, recognized him despite the disguise. Marcus was a huge boxing fan and had watched all of Tank's fights on television. Initially, Marcus kept the discovery to himself, thinking he might be mistaken. But when he saw Tank observing training for the third time in 2 weeks, he was certain it was really Gervonta Davis. The question that intrigued him was, why was one of the world's most famous boxers secretly visiting a small Baltimore gym? The answer came when Marcus connected the dots between the dates of Tank's mysterious visits and the arrival of the anonymously donated equipment. Even after the deliveries, Tank continued to appear occasionally to observe training, always discreet, but present enough to follow the young people's progress. Marcus realized it wasn't a coincidence that the anonymous benefactor knew exactly what equipment each young person needed and in what sizes. Someone had carefully observed all of them before making the donations. Instead of immediately spreading the discovery, Marcus decided to confront Tank directly. During one of the visits, he approached the boxer and simply said, "Thank you for everything you did for us, Tank." The expression of surprise on Gervonta's face confirmed all of Marcus's suspicions. Tank asked to speak with Marcus privately and explained why he had kept his identity secret. He didn't want the help to be seen as a publicity stunt or a way to improve his public image. He wanted the young people to feel deserving of the help on their own merit, not as beneficiaries of a celebrity's charity. Tank asked to speak with Marcus privately and explained why he had kept his identity secret. He didn't want the help to be seen as a publicity stunt or a way to improve his public image. He wanted the young people to feel deserving of the help on their own merit, not as beneficiaries of a celebrity's charity. Marcus promised to keep the secret, but asked for just one thing in return: that Tank allow him to record a short video thanking the anonymous benefactor without revealing his identity. He wanted other young people in the city to know that there were still people willing to help without expecting anything in return. Tank agreed, touched by the boy's maturity and gratitude. Marcus's video was posted on his gym's social media at the end of December. It was a simple video, just 3 minutes long, but full of authenticity and emotion. Marcus spoke on behalf of all the benefited youth, explaining how the anonymous help had transformed their lives and renewed their hopes for the future. The video showed Devon training with his new equipment, Keisha teaching techniques to younger girls, and other young people who had found in boxing an alternative to the temptations of the streets. There was no identification of the donor, just a sincere thank you to someone who had chosen to make a difference without seeking recognition. What no one expected was that the video would go viral. In 1 week, it had been shared thousands of times, not just by boxing fans, but by people touched by the story of anonymous generosity. Supportive comments came from across the country, and other people began to be inspired by the example to help young people in their own communities. Tank watched the growth of the video's repercussion with mixed feelings. On one hand, he was worried that his identity would be discovered. On the other, he was deeply proud to see how his action had inspired other people to act. The video had become much bigger than he imagined, but for all the right reasons. Observing the comments and stories of other people who began helping in their communities, Tank realized that gesture was no longer about him. It had become something much bigger. 3 weeks after the video went viral, Tank made a decision that surprised him. He called Marcus and asked to meet him at the Upton Boxing Center. When he arrived there, he gathered all the young people who had been benefited and finally revealed his identity. The reaction was shock, followed by even deeper gratitude. Devon Wright was the first to speak after the revelation. He said he now understood why Tank had chosen to help them anonymously. "You wanted us to believe in ourselves first, before knowing who was helping us," said the boy, with surprising wisdom for his age. Tank smiled, realizing that those young people had understood exactly the message he wanted to convey. His gesture had planted seeds of hope that would continue growing far beyond any public recognition he might receive.
Leave your like and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss the next cases.